Hello and welcome everybody to part 2 of our MFA workshop conversation. I am editor Michael Woodson here with managing editor Moriah Richards. If you missed part 1 of our conversation, go back to our January episode. And here we are going to hopefully be answering any and all of your questions that remain.
I don't know about how you felt at the end of your bachelor's degree, but I was like done.
Okay, I was so burnt out by the end of my getting my bachelor's, mostly because I was also working, and I was feeling really, I'm curious. I really want to talk about workshop, because part of that was I loved to write and I liked learning how to give constructive feedback, which I think is a big part of workshop when done well. But I was just like drained emotionally from sitting down and hearing people not give me really helpful advice and just say mean things about what I'd written. And there was one time in particular, and this was a year where it was just a bad writing year for me. I didn't have a lot of good ideas. I learned a lot in how to write poorly, to be honest, but I wrote a story that I was actually quite proud of, and it got just like, it was just did not go well. My workshop did not go well. And one of the students who was very, I don't know, just honest, I guess he would say he was, said something just really mean. And my professor like stopped the workshop and said, "We are not cruel in this classroom." And he was helpful, but it also made me feel too seen. I was like, okay, yeah. Okay. So that was mean. That's not me just reading into it.
Right.
Because sometimes workshop is amazing, and I think it is dependent on the structure and also the professor leading it. I'm just curious about your experience with an MFA in workshop.
Yeah, and this is something that if you're considering an MFA program, I think it's really important to ask questions during the application process about workshop structure.
Okay.
Because so the traditional workshop structure in an MFA program, and this is going back to like the 70s, right? It is that before the class, you will submit like before you come together, you will submit your writing. So it's usually about a week that people will have your piece. Many programs will also limit the amount of pages that you can submit at any time. So you can still write a novel and workshop your novel, or a stage play, or, but it's a certain number of pages that you can have at any one time. And that's just to prevent, everyone submitting 80 pages.
Right.
Because it's usually 2 or 3 people are going on the same day. So you'll have about a week with the work. People will generally, and this is the kind of weird academic part of it, because the professors have to ensure that you are participating. So they will generally request that you print off 2 copies of the story, one to hand back to the author with your notes on it, and one to hand into the professor. So you don't get graded on what you're saying, just so that they can check in and make sure that you are being an active participant in the workshop. So then it's workshop day, right? So you come and you're going to get workshop, and you sit down, and everyone else will discuss your piece in front of you, and you are generally not allowed to speak.
You're not, it's exactly. You're not, like, it's a rule. Like, you're not allowed to speak until it's over.
So our program gave us, and so I had 3 different professors in workshop. I had 4 workshop classes, but one professor I took twice. But they each had this rule that at the end of when the conversation came to a close, you were, as the author, you were allowed to speak for 5 minutes. And my problem with this structure is that, number one, it is very difficult for a lot of people, myself included, to sit there and feel like everyone is tearing you apart. It's almost like people are talking about you in another room and they don't realize that you're hearing them.
Ouch.
Yes. That is how it felt to me. And part of that, I think, was my age. I was a very green writer. A lot of these people had been honing their craft for much longer than I. And to me, it felt like there was a huge gap in the quality of our work. So I was only a lot of times hearing the negative.
Sure, of course.
And the positive things were getting buried because, when they're sitting there and they're like, well, I didn't understand this. I don't get this. Why does it have to be this way?
Right.
And then one person is like, this was actually really great. I loved the character. I loved the dialogue. You don't hear what they liked. You hear about how much it sucked, right?
Well, and tell me if this was true for you too. Like for me, it was structured like you start with what's working and then you finish with what isn't working. And so like the last thing I was left with always was a list of things that made it a bad story.
So that is not how my workshops were structured. It was just an open conversation. Okay. I even had one professor who never spoke.
Oh.
So he was present to make sure that things didn't get like totally out of hand, but it was just a conversation about like whatever people wanted to talk about.
Okay.
And to me, that was the hardest one because, I think it's the natural way that we converse as, I want to say American society, right? Like if you have 3 people in a group of 5 who are all bashing something, your natural instinct is not to be like, well, actually, it's to kind of go with the flow, right? Especially if you have 3 powerful, dominating voices. So if you're writing on your paper 10 things that you liked and 2 things you didn't like, in the conversation, because it is tending in a negative direction, you might just say the 2 things you didn't like.
Right.
But if that's all you're hearing when you're sitting in workshop, it can be very discouraging.
Yes, of course.
So it all depends on your personality, your experience, and like even just another thing I experienced in workshop is that some of my classmates had a hard time hearing the criticism.
Sure, of course.
So they would spend their whole 5 minutes kind of being defensive about the work. And I think that's a natural tendency, right? When you feel like you're being attacked, you want to stand up for yourself. Yeah. But in doing that, they lose all the good things that we like. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So nowadays, workshops across the United States are changing up their workshop form. Now, I experienced this not in an actual workshop, but in one of my craft courses. One of our professors was like, hey, I'm going to try a structure of workshop, which is called the asking. Oh. So it was structured at the beginning the same way, right? You receive somebody's work, you have a week to read it, you come to class with your notes prepared. But the only person who is allowed to speak and direct the conversation is the author.
Oh, wow.
So generally you would come with a list of questions. What did you think about the characters? What did you think about the setting? What did you think about the ending? And you are only allowed to speak to those questions.
That makes sense to me because when I think about the times where I felt, I don't want to say critique was wasted, but things that ultimately were not what I was hoping to work on, or things that I just didn't agree with. There are some things where I would get feedback about, wow, that person was right. I really want to work on that. Whereas other times I'm like, you know what, actually I stand by what I chose to do and I'm not gonna mess with that. And I'm always interested and willing to hear how any of my writing can be better. I mean, we're editors. We're constantly getting notes on each other's work.
Right.
And I love that because it's constructive and it's helpful. But if I could lead the conversation and be like, I don't love this aspect of the story, or at least in my head, I can know I'm going to ask a question about this because I think it needs some work and I don't know how to work on it yet.
And I think for me, the most powerful part of the asking workshop structure was that a lot of times in a workshop, I will have been thinking about something like, oh, I really don't think that this character's motivation is very clear. Mm-hmm. But those were not things that were discussed during workshop.
Right.
And then if I ask those in my last 5 minutes, people who hadn't had a chance, if you don't have a chance to think about it, how
right.
can you respond?
Right. Absolutely.
So with the asking, since I had a full 20 minutes or whatever it was to lead the conversation, I would be able to say, were the characters' motivations clear? Do you feel like you understood where they were coming from? Give people a little bit to sit there to review the work, to think about it, and then come up with a response that was helpful to me.
Oh, I love that.
So when you're looking into MFA programs, you're allowed to ask questions of the directors. You can, usually their emails are right on the program page. You can reach out. Hey, how do you guys structure your workshops? Are you doing any new or experimental structures? Having the power to ask those questions is not something that I realized that I had when I was applying. So it's important to know the different structures out there, because I think for me personally, the traditional structure is not helpful. I think with my anxiety problems, I just focus on, everybody thinks I'm terrible.
Yes.
I must be terrible. And I don't hear the things that will allow me to improve the things that need improved.
Totally.
And highlight the things that I'm actually doing very well.
And that's a better, and we should keep going, but that's a much better critique to me, because like, even just now I'm in a writer's group casually, and throughout NaNoWriMo, I had said something, I had expressed a concern about something in my writing to my friends. And I said, I don't think I'm very good at this. And then they were like, okay, tell me what you think you're good at then.
Right.
And I was like, well, I think I'm pretty good at setting, and I think I'm really pretty good at atmosphere and mood and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, if you just lean into those things, this other thing that you're concerned about will probably solve itself. And they were just really helpful in helping me notice what I actually think I'm okay at. And it ultimately just made my writing better.
Yeah, and I think that is something that an MFA is a pressure cooker.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I will say that. So the writer that I was when I left my undergraduate degree, like if you put my work side by side from my thesis to, I guess it was just 2 years prior, because I went to a 2-year program, you would not have thought that was the same person.
I mean, honestly, though, like
completely different.
That's hope. That's kind of the goal, though, right? Like, just
Yes.
like to continue to get better at the thing you are probably already good at.
And that was the thing. Like I wasn't able to see that until years after my program, when I was like, man, going through this box of material from my undergrad, like the themes are still there. I've always been particularly strong with my dialogue, but the rest of it has gotten like worlds better. And I do credit that to being able to take more craft courses.
Nice.
That is something that, we do focus a lot on the workshop. I think that is a strength for getting your MFA, is having dedicated time to have your material reviewed, but just being able to study things that you might not have
absolutely
even known that you had an interest in.
Right.
Like flash fiction, I never really thought about it until my program, and now here I am at Writer's Digest leading the Flash Fiction February Challenge. Like, it allows you to explore completely different avenues. And something that I don't know if you are aware of is that depending on what kind of program you are in, sometimes they'll even let you study across genres.
Oh.
Yes. So if you are going and you are studying, say, fiction, for some programs, you will be able to take craft poetry classes or craft nonfiction classes. But not every program allows you to do that. So I wrote a lot of cross-genre material before I got my MFA. My program did not allow you to study cross genres. I was only allowed to take craft classes from the fiction track.
Okay.
Which I didn't know before I applied there.
Right.
And so I write a lot less of creative nonfiction and poetry than I did before I went into my program, because I feel like, I jumped 10 levels writing fiction, and I kind of grew maybe 3 levels doing the poetry and creative nonfiction on my own.
Totally.
So it is something to definitely keep in mind.
Yeah.
If you're looking at, because they don't always advertise that on their websites, right?
Yeah.
They say, we have these 3 different programs, but they don't say
anything else.
Right.
Right. It's interesting to hear you say that you were on the younger side of people in their MFA program, because mainly a lot of my friends did immediately go into an MFA, and they also were like wishing they had taken just maybe a year between just to like take a rest before jumping back in. And that made me curious about, like, I could not have afforded to go to an MFA right away. I just knew I needed to get a job, and it was stressing me out to like need a job. I've kind of like ruminated on the idea of getting my MFA program as an adult now, working, and I just am curious, like, what does that look like for people who are working full time? Is it something that you feel is worthwhile, or well, is it something that you feel is doable?
It is definitely doable. I do want to say, knowing myself, if I hadn't gotten my MFA, I'm a now or never kind of academic person, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did my bachelor's right out of high school. I did my MFA right out of my bachelor's. And there was something in the back of my mind that said, if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it.
Yeah.
And that is definitely true for me.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are that kind of person and you're considering your program, like, don't let it become something in your rearview mirror. If it's something you really, really know that you want to do, right? For a lot of people, both my parents got their master's degrees when I was in college.
Okay.
It's something that they never even really thought about wanting until they didn't have to worry about me anymore.
Yeah,
and they're like, hey, with all this time to ourselves, like, we would love to further our education.
Go back to school, yeah.
And the MFA is a really great program for that, the style of the program. So there are several different forms, I guess you can say.
Okay.
There's the full residency, which is what I did. Mm-hmm. That is the traditional college experience, right? All of your classes are in person. I do want to do a little caveat here because of COVID. A lot of classes are doing either totally virtual or partial virtual. So I do want to say, like, full residencies have had to adapt a little bit. Some programs are back full in person, but if that is something that is a concern to you, those are definitely questions to ask, because, just because in 2022 they're going to be doing virtual classes doesn't mean they're going to continue that into 2023. But traditionally, most full residency programs will have an option for you to be full-time or part-time. So I was a full-time student. I want to be here for every class. I want to have all of my classes right in a row, and I want to graduate in 2 years. In my program, the people who were part-time took 1 or 2 less classes a semester, and they graduated a semester or 2 later. So they were still a full residency, right? They were there in Philadelphia. They were coming to class, but they were also more flexible in their schedule.
Right.
So on the other end of the spectrum, you have a low residency. So this kind of program does not require you to be like in a classroom, except for sometimes it's anywhere between like 7 to 10 days a year. They will bring all of their students to the campus for like a week-long workshop experience. And that's really just a way to help you to get to know the people that you're studying with, get to know your professors. And it's more like a conference from what I understand. But generally, it's more like a virtual program. You have your lessons online. You are generally working a full-time job and doing your classwork in your off hours. It's a lot more of a flexible college experience. And when it came to, like, I asked myself, can you do a low residency program part-time? And I'll be honest with you, I have no idea.
Okay, great. Yeah.
That is something that I think that I looked on many websites,
Yeah.
you know, for these campuses and these programs, and I couldn't find a strict answer. That's
Okay.
just something that if you're interested in, you would have to ask each individual program.
Okay.
Because I know full residency, most programs do offer a part-time.
Dual. Okay.
But then there is also the dual degree program. Most of these programs are full residency programs.
Yeah.
But the way that they work is that they allow you to get 2 degrees from the university simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
So a program that I actually was accepted to and I really considered going to would have allowed me to get my MFA in fiction alongside my master's in editing.
Oh, wow.
So it was the same amount of years, but it was just more classes. I ended up not going there partially because I didn't know if editing was where I was gonna go, and partially because it was a smaller, newer program, and I was attracted to like the more recognizable name.
Sure.
And for anyone who, like, it's not a secret, it's on my LinkedIn, like I went to Temple University.
Oh, yeah.
Which is known for its MFA programs.
Right.
So I was like, that's the I don't need any more questions. That's the one.
Yeah.
Which might have been a mistake in the long run because I didn't ask any questions.
Sure.
But the cool thing about dual degrees is it's not just things in the publishing and editing field, like the program that I was considering. You could also get your MBA. You know, any kind of master's program that the school allows you to partner with your MFA, you can study those together.
Okay.
And if you're anything like me, you might be thinking like, that sounds like hell. Why would you take so many classes at the same time? It just seems very overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
But if you do these dual degree programs, if you know for a fact, I'm going to get my MFA and I'm definitely going to get my MBA, packaging them together this way saves you a lot of money.
Okay.
And a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to do a 2-year program and then another 2-year program.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. So it all depends on what your specific goals are. And that's, I didn't know. I didn't know what my goals were. I didn't know to ask these questions.
Well, of course. Don't you ever think like the older I get, the more I realize how young I was when I was asked to make like huge decisions that I probably wasn't ready to make yet, which is probably why I'm ruminating on it now. Because I'm like, well, maybe I'm ready to make it.
Well, and it's also for the time that I was at in my life, I was engaged and I was not willing to move states and states away from my partner. Right. So he was getting his degree in Pittsburgh. And so I only applied to schools within a reasonable megabus distance.
Yeah, of course.
To Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And so when I was getting all of these rejections from my programs, I was like, okay, well, if I don't get in anywhere, I'll just go live in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I did get into a few places, but it's one of those things, you know, if you cast a wider net, then you'll have more options. But at this stage in my life, you know, I'm not willing to move.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not willing to quit my job.
Right.
Because I love my job. I love it here. So something like a low residency program would be perfect for me.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
But at the time I was like, I'm going to get it done. I'm going to do it so that I can travel on, I was even like, this just tells you the kind of human being I am, right? So I stacked my classes so that for every single semester I was there, I only had classes Monday through Thursday, so that or usually it was Tuesday through Thursday. I would shuffle them, right? Yeah. So then I could get on the megabus Friday morning, be in Pittsburgh, and not have to come back until Monday.
Yeah. Of course.
Like I did make it work, and at the time I was working freelance, so I was working remotely. I could work from anywhere.
Yeah.
But I was like, I can do this program in a way that I can make my life fit into it, but I was willing to uproot my life and do certain things to get the program, where you don't have to do it that way.
Sure, of course.
You can make the program fit your life and not the other way around.
This has been so helpful and interesting, and I have to imagine listeners who are going through the same experience of deciding whether or not they want to do this, I hope this has been helpful. But if there's a listener out there who hasn't even started questioning it, like, how do you know, how does someone ask or know, like, if an MFA program is right for them?
So my short answer is that no one but you can know. My little bit longer answer is why do you want to go? For me, it was because I wanted to become a better writer, and I wanted to extend my time to have to make decisions about my career.
Yeah.
And I met those goals. You know, by the time I left my program, I knew I wanted to be an editor. And I was able to do a lot of writing in those 2 years. But if you're going because you think that it's going to land you a job. So say you want to be a teacher, even if you get your MFA, it is not a guarantee that you will be hired to be a professor. You know, it's tough out there in the job market. Even if you get your MFA, there is no guarantee that you will get published. It's not that kind of stepping stone, which I think sometimes it is sold as like, all your dreams will come true once you have this diploma, and it's not true. So if you're going because you're going for yourself and your craft, I would say definitely explore what options are out there. If you're going because you think that it's gonna get you someplace different from where you're at, I would highly recommend doing more research and spending more time with it, because it's expensive to go to a program, but it's also extremely expensive to apply to programs. So just knowing what's best for you financially, emotionally, in your writing career, getting all of those ducks in a row, you'll have your answer at the end of that, whether or not now is the time for you to go and if you should go.
Well, thank you so much, Moriah. This was so helpful and fun.
Thank you, Michael. It's been great.